The water carriers, the land cracked under the weight of the sun, and the sky was as empty as the town's promise of rain. In Dry Creek, water wasn't just a need, it was a lifeline tied to the calloused hands of an old black farmer named Elijah. His wells dotted the fields of the multiracial farming community, their water cool and steady even in the driest months. Yet, no plaque bore his name. No thanks ever lingered longer than a handshake. Years ago, the town's white leaders scoffed at Elijah's work. A black man digging wells, they'd said, spitting into the dust, a fool's errand. But when their fancy machines failed and their own wells ran dry, they came to him, hats in hand. Elijah didn't argue, didn't gloat. He dug, for the land, for the people, for the hope of something better. Now Elijah's granddaughter, Asha, stood at the edge of the biggest well he'd ever dug, her fingers tracing the bucket's worn rope. She'd grown up listening to his stories, how he learned the land's language, how the earth whispered where water ran. But Elijah was gone now, and the land that held his wells was under threat. A developer named Martin Hayes rolled into town in a shiny black car, holding maps and promises. He wanted Elijah's land for a new water pipeline that would stretch for miles. The wells would be capped, the land raised. Progress, he called it. Progress didn't look like much to Asha. She saw only a town ready to forget the man who'd kept them alive. "You think we can fight him?" Maria, her neighbor, asked as they walked the dry fields. Maria's voice was weary, her eyes shadowed from too many sleepless nights. Asha nodded, her heart pounding. "We have to." That night, Asha sat by the well, a notebook on her lap. She thought about her grandfather, his stories, the way he'd speak of water like it was alive, like it chose who was worthy. The words came slowly at first, then faster, spilling out of her like the water Elijah once pulled from the earth. The next morning she stood in the town square, her voice strong despite her trembling hands. "My grandfather's wells saved this town. His hands brought life to land no one else believed in. And now they want to take it all away," she said, her voice echoing against the empty storefronts. People began to gather. Black, white, Mexican, old, young. Farmers who'd watered their fields with Elijah's wells. Children who'd learned to swim in the small ponds he'd dug. "They call it progress," Asha continued, holding up her notebook. "But what's progress if it buries the past, if it erases the people who kept us alive?" Her words spread like wildfire. Over the next weeks, she and others held meetings by the wells, sharing stories about Elijah and the land. The elders spoke of his quiet strength. The children recited poems. Asha helped them write, their small voices rising like a chorus. Hayes tried to shut them down, sending lawyers and threats, but Asha's rebellion grew louder. They painted murals on the well stones, their colors bold and defiant. They sang songs that carried across the fields. And then, one night, it rained. It came in bursts, sharp and sudden, soaking the dry earth. Asha stood under the downpour, her face turned to the sky, and she thought of her grandfather, of the water he'd coaxed from the stubborn ground. The rain didn't end the fight, but it strengthened their resolve. By the time Hayes came back with his bulldozers, the town stood together. They formed a human chain around Elijah's land, their hands clasped tight. "You can't erase us," Asha said, her voice steady. "This land remembers," and so did they.